It is what it is. It's like...
Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm here with Daniel Fox.
Yes,
Yay!
I'm back. I'm back.
Yeah. He's back with us again.
Yep, good to be back.
How have you been?
Busy. Yep, been a little chaotic, and got this little sinus thing. So I'm not, maybe now and then I could do like I'm fine. You know, I got my stuffed head, but it's not that bad. If I sound a little different, it's just my nasal filter going on here.
Nasal filter.
Yeah, like a sound filter, like, you know, to make it sound like. Did you ever play with one of those voice distorting apps that makes you sound like Darth Vader or a cricket or whatever? Did you ever play with any?
I remember when those were a device that you could buy.
I owned one. It was so, I
you
thought
did?
It was so cool. I did. It was like a little over a foot long, and it was red. Mm-hmm. And I guess it must have had different settings that you could talk into it like a microphone, and then it would distort it out the other end. Yeah.
Yeah.
So pretty neat. Anyway,
you have to get one of those on the podcast here.
Like a picture of a retro voice distortion toy from the 80s or something. Maybe it was 90s.
Yeah. Or we could just have our editor do it. He can change our voices to.
Oh, yes.
Sound like we're talking in super slow motion. That was an in-mic effect right there. How do you like that?
The mic effect.
In-mic.
In-mic.
Done in-mic.
We want to thank our patrons over at patreon.com/reason together for supporting.
We're so far off the rail already.
Yeah, the intro was pretty. Anyway, not pretty, but anyway, okay. Thank you, patrons. Thank you for your support, and hopefully you're not doubting your investment right at this moment. We thank you for enabling us to get a podcast editor, a blog editor, and pay the bills as far as our yearly expenses or monthly expenses. So thank you for that.
Yes, we appreciate you guys.
Yep. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, you appreciate this reasoning together, and you say, hey, this is fun. Listening to some guys just kind of talk about stuff and bring scripture into play and how that applies to it. You can go to patreon.com/reason together and sign up for any one of a number of tiers there. If you're an elite patron, you get access to the Aftershow, which we've been doing for some time now, an extra segment of the podcast only for the elite patrons. Also get a free t-shirt. And as a patron, you get access to the patron-only message board. And so, anyway.
Which has been a hive of activity.
Here just in the last few weeks really picked up, hasn't it?
Last couple months, yeah. We've had some more patrons come on, and they've been very engaging, and it's kind of pulling everyone else out of their shells, and it's been great seeing the conversations happen over there on the message board. So
yeah, well, we've got a number of things here today that are really unrelated, but are going to make for an enjoyable conversation. And I have to say, starting off, I don't even know exactly what this is. I know this is your file here, but Hitchens razor. Can we start with that?
Okay. That was actually a correction that I wanted to address.
Okay.
And, I can't remember if it was after show or if it was in the main episode, but I figured I'd put it in the main episode just to cover our bases. I had referenced Hanlon's razor.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was in the after show, which I said states that what can be stated without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Okay.
Right? Or what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And I got my razors confused. That is Hitchens' razor.
Oh, that's Hitchens' razor. Okay.
Yes. Hanlon's razor is actually another interesting one too, but I always get them confused because they both start with H.
Okay.
And I think it says Hanlon's razor is something like, don't attribute to malice what can more easily be attributed to stupidity.
Oh, okay. And what about Occam's razor?
Oh, that's the idea of the simplest conclusion commonly being the best.
Okay.
Now, I guess with any of them, they're not like a law, right? They're just a philosophical thinking device
Okay.
to kind of help. It's like a mental shortcut, if you will. But anyway, so I wanted to issue the correction just in case someone was trying to look that up and like, wait, that's not what that says. It's because,
Misinformation. He
yeah,
said,
it's fake news.
yeah,
It's because
yeah.
Tom got dyslexic with his razors.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
see, and Tom's more of a razor guy. So anyway, he knows his razors better. I get the electric one that's on sale, and I overuse it without replacing the blades enough, probably.
Yeah.
And then
You're an electric razor guy?
I am.
Really?
Yep.
I did not know that.
Yep.
Learn something new every day.
Always have been. Um, all right. Yeah, it's that opportunity for like a non-handyman like me to have something like a power tool in my hand, and be doing something with it every day that doesn't harm me too
Right.
much. So yeah, where I don't tear other things up. Um,
And it's
so
rare you get to stick a power tool against your face like that. So you might as well have something.
Oh my goodness.
Certainly a much more delicate shave than an angle grinder would give you. But
Indeed.
yeah.
Or the old Laurel and Hardy sandpaper. Okay.
Exfoliating, don't you know?
That's a good
That's
like skincare term, isn't it?
right.
Exfoliating, which basically means it rubs it raw.
Right. Yeah, Laurel and Hardy were just, dapper men before their time, and that must have just been why they were exfoliating before it was a thing.
Oh boy. Okay. So, maybe this leads into like an attempt to like rescue our humor a little bit. No.
I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, 2 Timothy 2:22, Paul writes to Timothy, and he says, "Flee also youthful lusts." Now, I would imagine that many times that text has been preached to young people, to teens, say, and it's been drawn out, that you need to guard your eyes and your mind and be pure.
Mhm.
And this is a side note. Do you ever find any humor with the term necking and petting? Is there anything funny about that to you? I mean,
Um, necking?
yeah. Have you ever heard of that, necking and petting?
I mean, maybe like 30 years ago.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
still a term?
No, I can't say that it did. Well, to some it might be, but in that, like, yeah, petting. I don't know. Just okay. I get it.
Yeah,
I sort of. It's just interesting. But okay. So, say, young people, you need to flee those youthful lusts because you lust, like typical boys lust, and blah 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 blah. Okay. Do you think that Paul might? Uh, let me back up. What do you think could be youthful lusts? I mean, what would be lusts that are typical of youth?
Mhm.
Now, Timothy, at this point, I don't know his exact age. I'm going to guess in his 20s, maybe 30s. But so it's telling Timothy, you need to, beware of that. You need to flee these particular
Yeah.
lusts. What other lusts might you see that would be typical of youth? It could be described as youthful lusts.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna take a maybe slightly tangential tack from that.
Okay.
That to say that maybe it's possible that he's not referencing a particular set of lusts that are
Mm.
only capable of being committed by young people. When I read through the book of Proverbs, it kind of seems to me that the same lusts that plague grown men also plague young men, but young men have a different way of handling their passions oftentimes
Hmm.
than older men do. So, an example of this, of course, you mentioned immorality, right? Lust. That the one that comes to mind first. That's of course a big deal in Proverbs, 6 and 7 and so on. But I'm thinking, another example would be like money, right? Does not every age group suffer with the temptation to use money foolishly? But
Mm-hmm.
yet, isn't it more common, maybe, that young people have a harder time controlling their passions regarding spending? They get money and it burns a hole in their pocket because they just don't know how to spend wisely yet. Or maybe it's their temper, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, materialism of other kinds. I don't know. I'm thinking that maybe that could be referring to just the youthful way that people approach lusts of any kind when they're young.
Hmm. So you're kind of taking it as flee a youthful approach to lusts. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Perhaps I'm just throwing it out there as a
Mm-hmm.
possibility,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, I can't think of a particular set of lusts in and of themselves that plague young people that don't also plague older men too.
Well, yeah, that is a difficult thing. And maybe I would say there are certain and by lust, of course, we simply mean a desire. Sometimes I
Yeah,
think the word lust can automatically have some sort of a sexual connotation in people's mind, which isn't
yeah.
really textually the case. Um, so as I'm looking at the word, here, so yeah, youthful speaking, it even says recently invented or innovated. Well, that's just the idea of probably new or young. And so a person who's youthful is young. Um, but it's something that he's actually supposed to flee, and not something that you, yeah. So I mean, there's obviously a reaction here to this young lust or youthful lust. The one that I guess came to my mind, and like you said, it really, you see it in a lot of men, but part of that is that a man who hasn't conquered this lust is still kind of boyish,
Hmm.
and so I guess I
Yep.
could call it a youthful lust, and that is pride. That a young man wants to be big. He wants to be there's a balance. I mean, obviously there's something inbuilt in men that they want to be recognized for something. They want to accomplish something. And there's, I think, a
Hmm.
goodness to that.
Yep.
That's just a natural. But to want to be supreme and superior and be seen as the best and I mean, how many boys are cocky, or they're arrogant, or they're um, they inflate their ability in their own
Hmm.
minds, like I'm awesome at this thing. And
Yeah.
um, so to me, that could be a youthful lust. And are older men proud? Yeah, they are. But too, would we say then that's because they haven't matured? They haven't been knocked around
Yeah.
long enough to realize, hey,
That's
listen, settle down.
funny illustration of that is that there's a common tendency among young men, and I'm pretty sure this is innate, that every guy believes he can handle himself in a fight.
Oh yeah,
Every guy, just when he envisions himself getting in a fight, he envisions what he's going to do and how he's going to do it, and he's just going to dominate and wreck the opponent, right? But the reality is often very different. And it was funny in my MMA school days to watch guys come in for the first time and their confidence oftentimes, exceeded their ability.
and
I would say
within two
most
spars.
times within, not even within two, within one. They'd be getting tapped out 5 or 6 times in the same 3-minute roll.
Like, man, how's this?
It was,
Yeah,
yeah, guys tend to overestimate their abilities, especially
yeah.
with fights.
Yeah. Now, I'd have to say for myself, I was more of a self-preservation guy, and I don't think I envisioned it that way. when when my dad put boxing gloves on me and my brother, as probably like, get me out of these. I don't want to do this.
You decided to practice your run fu.
That's right. That's yeah, yeah. I believe my feet were my greatest defense. Like, uh, but um,
That's appropriate.
yeah.
I know we laugh, but it's
Well,
fine. It's
yeah.
fine to run from a
There,
fight.
there's something to knowing, I don't think I can probably take on all these 9 guys at one time. I think I'll maybe, while I have a chance to get out
Yeah,
the other side of the alley, I'll run. Um,
yeah.
so any other, so I think of pride, of course, men. struggle with their thoughts, and especially probably at that time when they're young, unmarried, hormonal, you know what I mean, going through hormonal changes, it's probably going to be raging at that point. So yes, their thought life would be, I would say, a lust that is pronounced in youth, that has to come under control. Well, it says, but here again, it says not just control it, but flee from it. Flee from it. So there's things that you just have to run away in a way. But any other thoughts on what might be, even if it's not, even if we wouldn't say it's never found in any other man but a young man or a young woman. Honestly, I guess I'm eliminating that. That we would say it's certainly pronounced there, and if someone doesn't get a hold of it, it's not that we would say, oh, this lust is just typical of everybody, but rather that this person never grew up, because he's still acting youthful. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I thought as a child, I acted as a child. What are those lusts, you think? Any other ideas before we move on?
I don't know. I think we're kind of saying the same thing different ways, because to say, a 45-year-old guy, treating his lusts like a boy would, who still hasn't grown up, you're still saying he's associating a common lust with the way a young person would handle it. Which is kind of what I was saying from the beginning, but you're saying it a different way. So yeah, I think we're in agreement on that.
Okay. Well, that helps me to think through it. And you mentioned like the example of money. And of course that goes back to just satisfying our cravings, doesn't it? That we want, a lot of times kids they blow money there. Now there are some exceptions. And when you have a number of kids, you might see that variation, but I had one of my sons, he, and I've given the example in the past, but I've been thankful for this one Lego set that he bought, because he really wanted that Lego set, and I said, this is like every bit of your spending money. And when you spend this, you don't have any more money, it's all gone, whatever. And so now he wanted that set. So he bought it, and he got home and didn't like it. He got it, I guess he got it unpacked, and within a couple of days or whatever, he just wasn't satisfied with it. And it hit him so deeply, I think, that moved him, that I lost my money on this thing, and I don't really care for it. And ever since then, he became a very, very frugal he's a penny pincher.
Lesson learned.
Yep. And but then obviously, other young people, they just, like as we say, it burns a hole in their pocket because they want it. But anyway.
Well, I have to tell you, it's better to learn that lesson now with a Lego set than it is to learn it in 20 years with a car that you're going to spend the next 5 years paying off.
Yep.
Yeah, or a house that you spend the next 30 years paying off. It's better to learn that lesson young.
Yep. What do you want to hit next here?
I want to hit this thought-terminating cliché thing.
Me too. This is going to be fun.
I'm excited about this. This is a fun one. This is from one of our patrons, from Omar. He says the subject here, thought-terminating cliché. He says, I recently became acquainted with this term, and I thought it was a really interesting concept you might enjoy exploring. A thought-terminating cliché is a common phrase or maxim which may be true, but is used not to make a rational point, but to end a discussion. So, and we've all seen these, but this is just a term given to this. And I'm saying it's basically something that doesn't add information to an argument. It, in a sense, does the opposite. It tries to stop the argument. And he gives some examples of this. He says, employee, I've been thinking about how we're tracking inventory, and it seems it is being handled very inefficiently. Employer, you have too much free time. Get back to work. That's the implication, is get back to work. In other words, we're not going to discuss it. Right? Mm-hmm. Another example, he says, is the phrase, it is what it is, or that's just your opinion. I'm going to add, that's just your interpretation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Here's another one. We all have heard this one here. Trust the science. This one here, racist. That's how you know you've won the argument, is when somebody calls you a racist. I've heard that saying before. And then the phrase, to each his own. And he says, I think that if we're not careful, we can be guilty of using thought-terminating cliches in religious areas as well. Example, person one, I'm really concerned with the direction our church is headed. I just don't think it's biblical how ... Person 2 interrupts and says, "You're just bitter."
Which means the conversation doesn't really much go beyond that.
Right. So they've shut down all discussion by saying, no, your concern is invalid. You're just bitter. And, I would say that, and I don't think Omar is disagreeing with this, but there are times where, well, yeah, they do have a legitimate complaint and, telling them they're bitter is true. But there are probably also other times where the complaint is illegitimate and they are just bitter. So in that case, in that use case, it would not be a thought-terminating cliche. It would be an accurate assessment of the person's complaint.
Well, yeah, but still, I guess the reasoning through their actual argumentation, other than just saying, "Well, you're just bitter." Well, it may be a true statement, but it's not a full dealing with the accusation.
Right. It's not teaching them, their own condition. He says other religious examples include the phrase "only God can judge." I've honestly seen this used more by unsaved people than by saved people.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've seen people with this tattooed on them or on bumper stickers on their cars.
Really?
Only God can judge.
Only God can judge. Wow.
Yep. And that's because they don't want some Christian coming up and trying to convert them, right? Only God can judge me. They view any type of attempted conversion as, judging them.
You're judging them, yeah.
Yeah. Here's another one. He says, "The Lord works in mysterious ways."
He says,
he says, "This is true, but may be used as a scapegoat." What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I mean, because it can justify anything, so you tell this really weird story about this happened and this happened.
Yeah. An angel carried me out of a burning building.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you just mentioned this here. Maybe it was in an after show, though. Somebody tells this story and they go, "Oh, the Lord works in mysterious ways," which is a true statement. But what they're doing is they're pinning it all to the Lord. Like, obviously he did that.
Right.
Well,
and it's like, I'm the guy going, well, can you show me like how this happened? Like, do you have any evidence for your completely unfalsifiable claim? It's like, oh, the Lord just moves in mysterious ways. Well, I can't prove or disprove what you're saying.
Obviously, it's their prerogative to think what they want to think. Sure. I'm saying if they want to think that was the Lord and he worked in a mysterious way, great. But it's just that as far as and I guess where this would be a problem as a thought-terminating cliche is where it stops anybody from saying, like what you said, unfalsifiable. You can't say, no, I don't think actually the Lord would do that because, well, the Lord works in mysterious.
I can think of another one kind of along those lines where someone will say, well, the Holy Spirit led me. The Holy Spirit is leading me to do this.
Your God told me. Well,
it's like that. Yeah, that immediately shuts down all questioning. And you just are supposed to take the person's word for it,
Yeah, then it like ratchets up the confrontation level, times 5 because it says, now you actually have to say, no, he's not. I mean, without like trying to reason through it, you have to just disagree.
Right. So it seems a thought-terminating cliche can be a true statement, but it can also be abused to be used to shut down conversation. He gives another one here, which is actually a quote from Scripture, Deuteronomy 29:29. "The secret things belong to the Lord." He says, again, this is true, but may be used as a quick reply to avoid studying a topic. Yeah, this is all true. Everything he's saying is true here. That verse is absolutely true. And there are some things we can't understand, and thus the conversation cannot go any further.
And yet, yes, doesn't Proverbs say that something like the glory of a king is to study out a matter?
Yes.
But we don't want to study it, then it's a secret thing, man. Or the one above it, unfortunately used in.
I missed that one.
Yeah, touch not the Lord's anointed, taking David's phrase regarding King Saul to apply to, say, the pastorate, something like that.
Right. How about this one? Well, you're a compromiser.
Yeah, or the way I might see that is Which I can understand when you're trying to warn somebody about somebody. Somebody says, "Hey, I saw a book by so and so," and you want to give them a quick synopsis. Hey, you need to be careful of that guy. Well, you don't necessarily have at ready recall a list of 27 doctrinal deviations of this guy. You just know generally, hey, that guy's a modernist. You just need to be careful, or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Well, that sounds thought terminating. It doesn't have to be, but you don't have time or the mental recall to call those things. And so I could see that being like, well, he's a compromiser.
Right. Yeah. And I guess we should make sure that our listeners understand here. We don't mean, and I don't think Omar means, that any of these phrases are always a thought terminating cliche. Mm-hmm. Some of them have a legitimate use. Mm-hmm. Like here's another one. He says, "That's Calvinism."
And then just shuts it down.
Yeah. In other words, saying, "Oh, that's Calvinism," it shuts down the discussion. Well, sometimes it might be, but I think oftentimes it happens too, where someone just doesn't understand the issue and they call something Calvinism that isn't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
One that comes to mind as I think of that is, well, all means all, right? Well, that's a thought terminating cliche sometimes, because a lot of times the same person will turn around and try to explain how Romans 11, where it says all Israel shall be saved, well, it just means all Israel alive at the time, or it doesn't mean all in the way it says it all. So there is such thing as thought terminating cliches with the saying all means all, but it isn't always that, if that makes sense.
Yes, all doesn't always mean all in the broadest, biggest possible sense.
Right. And then the next one here, you want to read that one?
Yeah, he's a liberal. Yeah. And again, he might be. But if you're in the middle of a conversation where you actually can converse and you can actually reason with the person, you actually have recall of things that he said, you can say more than he's a liberal. Don't just terminate. But anyway, so he says, are there other examples you can think of? What about you? Did you come up with some?
I actually wrote those 3 down at the bottom.
Okay.
One of them I already mentioned. That's the saying, "That's your interpretation."
Yep.
And when I get that one, and that's probably the most common one I get, is I'll just explain to people what the meaning of the word interpretation is. When something is interpreted, right? When you read a letter, when someone writes you a birthday card, right? It has one meaning. It has one meaning. It means happy birthday. Right? If you take something out of that doesn't say happy birthday, you have interpreted wrongly, because it has one meaning. Mm-hmm. So there can't be multiple interpretations of the same thing. There can only be one right interpretation. And people often get very miffed at that. And often people don't know that there are rules of interpreting. Mm-hmm. Well, there are actual rules of interpreting, and they're completely unaware of them most times.
Well, right, because they use them so subconsciously. I mean, they operate by rules, and if they were to be brought face to face with that, like when you read a birthday card, what makes you not say that this is sort of some sort of encoded message of hate to you? Well, obviously it means what it says. Oh, okay. Well, so there's certain rules that you're going by.
Right. And to a degree, people do that subconsciously. But if they're not aware of the rules to be able to use them actively, they are subject to being disingenuous, and they are subject to letting their emotions rule over an interpretation. So someone who is what's a good term that I can use? A low information interpreter. Let's say it that way.
Okay.
Like you have like low information voters. Mm-hmm. People who will believe whatever the media tells them. You sometimes have low information interpreters. So these are people who will take a position on a biblical topic just based on how they feel about it, using those subconscious rules of interpreting. But when you use them subconsciously, they're weak. Right? They have to be bold. They have to be understood, these rules, in order for you to not let your emotions rule over your decision. So yeah, that's the most common one I get.
Okay, that's your interpretation.
Yeah. The other one is, it's all in God's plan. So they completely botch a situation. They make dumb decisions. Life-changing circumstances happen. And they're like, well, it's all in God's plan. Like, is it though, in that sense? It like, okay,
Right.
I'd agree I agree there is a permissive will of God, right? And God didn't stop you from being stupid. But you did a dumb thing and you've messed your life up. Don't just sit there and go, it's all in God's plan, because you don't want to discuss your decision.
Yeah, well, to me, that is kind of a hyper sovereign statement, and I would replace. It would be more true if it said it's all in God's design, meaning God designed it such that if you run into a brick wall, you stop and it hurts. You know, that's built into the design. That you catch your small toe on a chair leg, it's going to hurt. It's not a punishment. God's not saying, "Aha, you ran into the chair, therefore I will punish you with a sore toe." It's just built into the design of cause and effect. But
right.
What they're seeming to say was, but by your example, might be that it's kind of taking the heat off of them. Right. And saying, well, that, God would have wanted that anyway. No, he didn't. No. You're basically ascribing it to a fatalist mentality that everything that's done is exactly what God wanted done on every level. And so if I made a stupid decision, well, obviously he wanted me to make that. In fact, he made me make this stupid decision. You know what I mean? That's where the logic takes you. So it's all in God's plan. Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. And then this one, do your research. Do your research. So I have gotten this one before, from like conspiracy theorist type people, which, there's a saying floating around now: the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality is about 6 months. And that's because, in recent days, it has seemed like all the conspiracy theories about, big government and all the swamp and all the bureaucracy and the deep state and all these things, there's a lot of truth coming out that shows, hey, some of those conspiracy theories were correct. Now, if you're a conspiracy theorist and you're listening to this, that does not logically follow then that all past conspiracy theories thus are true. Okay? That's bad logic. Okay? But I have had this happen before where I'll talk to someone who's got some wild political view or some other view, and and you keep taking the argument back further and further and further, and they'll say, well, I follow this source, this source says this, and I say, well, how do you know that source is true? Well, because I do my research, and okay, well, what about those sources you research? How do you know those are true? And like, well, because the other sources confirm those sources. Well, how do you know those are true? And I will do this in a sense to conspiracy theorists just to kind of see what they do and watch them squirm a little bit so that they start thinking a little more. But they'll eventually get to a point where they'll just say to me, well, you need to do your research. Just do your research. Just look it up. Just do your research. And I'm like, okay, granted, could there be truth to me going and doing research and then I come to the same conclusion they do? Yeah, absolutely. That's fair. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it is just a thought-terminating cliche where they're tired of having to defend their position and they just say, well, do your research.
Yeah. Now in that example, honestly, I feel like both sides, we always, well, I say always, we typically operate by faith when mm-hmm. we're listening to other people. And that's the same for history,
Absolutely.
We believe that this happened in history. Why? Because we believe that writer. Well, how do we know that writer did it? The same with all of our medical research, and we could draw it back further and further, but that's part of the point of just taking someone's word for it that we trust, is that we don't have to do all the research.
Right.
I could go get the degree and do the scientific experiment myself, but I'd rather just take his word for it.
Right. But it is it's kind of similar to that, I'm the expert type thought terminating cliche. Do your research is kind of the same thing.
Okay.
It's saying the same thing. It's saying, I have done my research.
Right. Yeah. The implication is that if you did your research, you would come to my same conclusion. And until you come to my conclusion, you haven't done enough research.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of reminds me of that funny saying. There was a guy that used to teach Baptist history, and he would say something about his instructor or something was, I forget, a Presbyterian or something, but he went to heaven. Now he's a Baptist, right? Which is in a sense to imply, had he done more biblical study on earth, he would have become a Baptist.
Right.
You know,
Had he seen the light here?
right.
Okay, the one that I thought of, and this isn't so much. It doesn't have to be snarky. It just can really fizzle a conversation. That's easier said than done.
That's easier said than done.
Somebody tries to give you some advice. Well, what you need to do is, or what we really should do is, blah 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 blah. Yeah, well, that's easier said than done.
Yeah,
It's kind of like, well, you can say it, but that's a lot of work. Yeah, and then it basically, okay, true. It's easier. Anything's easier said than done, I think.
And it will be hard.
But anyway, that's the one I thought of after reading that. So,
okay, good.
I don't know if one of my favorites is as you read the list, though. One of his first ones is, "It is what it is." It's
right now, see, I
the
had,
basic statement of reality. It is what it is. Well, yes,
right.
indeed.
Well, when that's a tautological statement, right? Where it essentially
okay, come
repeats
on.
the same thing. It repeats the same thing twice, right? It is what it is, or it will be what it will be, right?
Yes.
That sort of thing. It's tautology, right? And I remember reading somewhere on this that is common with thought-terminating cliches, is that it essentially is circular or tautological. It'll say the same thing, kind of parallel, because it is just ultimately meant to sound like it's informative or sound like it is final, but it really doesn't contribute anything to the discussion.
Yeah, that's funny.
I had someone recently, I was talking to them about the Lord, and I appreciated what they said, even though they're a pagan and they rejected everything I said.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated what they said because they were honest. They said, we can talk about something else now. And I'm thinking, I can appreciate that.
I can
Not
appreciate the
not the
straightforwardness
outcome
of
I
it.
wanted. Yeah, not the outcome I wanted, but at least you didn't try some thought terminating cliche with me. Well, they did at first, I should say. They said, I've read the Bible. And I said, "Really? You've read the Bible?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "You've read all of it?" And they said, "Oh yeah." And it's like this point, you can tell that they're lying. They did not, by any stretch of the imagination, read the entire Bible. And I said, "So you understood all of it?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I understood all of it." I said, "Well, you'll have to teach me some things because I've
Because there's a
spent my
bunch.
life studying the Bible, and there are still things I don't get. So enlighten me." So her thought terminating cliche was basically, "Oh, I've read it all and I understood it all. Basically, there's nothing new you can tell me about it that would persuade me." So there was an attempt at a thought terminating cliche there.
Yeah.
But I responded to it by saying, "How could you have understood it all? Because I've been studying it longer than you and I don't understand it all." But then finally she got to a point where she said, "Let's just talk about something else."
All right,
And I
fair
was like,
enough.
"Okay, I appreciate the honesty."
All right, that's good. Let's see here. We've got just a few minutes left.
Yeah, I don't know that we have time for anything, do we?
No, maybe we'll just have to cut it short and move into the after show.
Yep.
Okay. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for another conversation here. If you have your own questions, comments, it doesn't even have to be related to what we were talking about today. You have something that comes up in your own life or thinking, and you say, I wonder about that. Have you ever thought about that? Or what does the Bible say about that? Feel free to send that our way, reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, and I can maybe even share it on another episode, and it would help someone else out too, and raise that as a question. Again, that's reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, just don't email us a one phrase email that just says, That's your interpretation. Because I will reply and I will just say, well, it is what it is.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, we do appreciate you being here with us on this episode. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.